Morning Year 4 and welcome to lesson 6 of writing hundredths. So first of all, we've got an in focus task up here, and I'd like for you to then point your attention to this question. What number does this show? Now, when I say this show, we're referring to these groups of discs or counters. I have a few questions here that I'd like to share. What is the number shown on each disc, first of all? Would anybody like to help me with that? Have a look. Well, we can see as a decimal, we have got 0.01 on each disc, and we know that that represents hundredths. So each disc represents 1/100th. Now, how many are there altogether? Now, you should be able to look because it's quite straightforward. It's been displayed in an array. Can you count how many discs there are altogether? Let me give you a moment. Fantastic. I'm hoping that you were able to count. In fact, there are 15 discs altogether. So there are 15 hundredths there. Now, lastly, what should we do when there are more than 10 hundredths? Can you think back to previous lessons that we've been doing for this week? Let's look at the next slide to figure it out. Now, I'm hoping the word that you were shouting out on our last slide was this word that you can probably see in the top right corner, regrouping. Now, we worked out on our previous slide that we had 15 hundredths discs. Now, I want you to have a quick look here at this place value chart. You can see that we have got three different columns. We've got the O representing ones, we've got the T, lowercase t, sorry, representing tenths, and we've got the lowercase h representing hundredths. And let me just put my little decimal point there so we know. So we started off originally with 15 hundredths counters, but we are going to be regrouping them. How many of those hundredths counters would I need to regroup in order to make a tenths counter? Can you have a look? Well, I'm hoping that you'll be able to see that we need to now regroup 10 of those hundredths counters, and we're going to be moving them now into the tenths counters. So what do we have left? Can we work it out? Let's go column by column. So first of all, we can see in the hundredths counter, we have got only 5 of the hundredths discs left. So we've got a 5 there. We can see that the digit 5 is in the hundredths place. And because we've regrouped 10 of those discs, we've now moved them over to the tenths column. And we can see that we've got 1/10 in the tenths place. We've got our decimal point and we've got 0 in the ones because we've got no ones. Now, how would I write this as a decimal? Let's listen on. Now, I'm hoping that you would have seen that by us using the place value chart, it would have been quite straightforward to see how we'd write that as a decimal, but sometimes we don't always have these wonderful place value charts to hand. So we need to break it down a little bit more. So we started off with 15 hundredths. You can see I've got this here in my part whole model at the top. We then partitioned it into 10 hundredths and also 5 hundredths. Let me just write those in. Fantastic. But remember, after regrouping, we realized that actually 10 of those hundredths would give us 1/10, and then we had 5 hundredths left over. Now, if we were writing both of those numbers as decimals, we know that 1/10 will be written as 0.1, and then we know that 5 hundredths will be written as 0.01. Now, altogether, we would then add that up, and that would give us 0.15. So we often read 0.15 as 15 hundredths, but we can also read it as a fraction as 15/100. Before we move on, I just wanted to go over something about the last answer so that we're crystal clear, because when I've taught this lesson previously, some children tend to get muddled because they place their zeros in the wrong columns. So as you can see here, we started off with 1/10 and we were adding it to 5 hundredths. Now, what answer do you think some children might muddle and get as their answer when adding those two decimals together? Well, if you look at the digits and the numbers in them, some children actually end up writing 0.6 because they add that 1 and the 5 together. However, it's not correct, I'm afraid. You have to almost visualize a place value chart. I often as well, I sometimes actually draw the numbers, the letters, sorry, on the top to kind of help me out. If that also helps you, then please do it. So let's look at the place value chart. We can see here that we started off with 1/10, and we know that that would give us a 0 in the ones column and a 1 in the tenths column. We also know that for writing 500ths, we would have to have a 0 in the ones column, a 0 in the tenths column, but a 5 in the hundredths column. So when we add that all together, we can see that we will then have a 5 in the hundredths column, a 1 in the tenths column, put our decimal point, and then 0 in the ones column. So the answer is in fact 0.15, not 0.6. So please make sure you're being very careful when you're doing your calculations. Okay, so we're now moving on to question 2. So let's have a look at the top and see what it's asking us to do. So it's asking us to write 1 and 41/100ths as a decimal. Now that again seems like a very big number, but you can see here that this place value chart has been filled out for you. We have got 1 in the ones column, we've got nothing right now in the tenths column, but we have got 41 of the hundredths discs in the hundredths column. Now how could we regroup all these hundredths? Any ideas? Let's click on to the next slide to figure it out. Now I'm hoping when I last asked your question on the previous slide, you were able to say, well, of course, Miss Sola, we're going to be regrouping those hundredths counters into tens. So you can see here that I've got one group of hundredths counter that I'm going to be moving into the tenths column. And I've got another lot, another lot, and another lot. Because remember, we've got 41 in the hundredths counters. And we now know that if we move 40 of those hundredths counters into the tenths column, we will then end up with 4 of the tenths counters in the tenths column. Now let's have a look down here. What is left therefore? Let's have a look. In the hundredths counter, we only have one of the hundredths counters left. Because of our regrouping, we now have got 4 tenths counters in the tenths column, and we also know that we've already got one of the ones in the ones column. Brilliant. So we can see over here that in fact 1 and 41/100ths would also be broken down as 1/1, 4/10ths, and 1/100ths. And remember, you can see that by those discs or counters, we call them, that we've just worked with on the place value chart. Now writing each of those as a decimal, we know that 1/1 would just be written as a 1. We know that 4/10ths would be 0.4, and we know that 1/100ths would be 0.01. Now remember, it's really, really important that you're thinking about where all those digits go on a place value chart, and especially those zeros. But we know when we add them all together that writing 1 and 41/100ths as a decimal would be 1.41. Now here is a chance for you to have some guided practice of what we've just been learning. So I want you to have a look at this question 1. It says, write each number as a decimal. Now you can use a ones, a tenths, or a hundredths counter to help you. So if it works that it's easier for you to draw the counters out like we've been doing in the previous questions, please do that as well. Now I want you, in a moment, you're going to be pausing the video, and remember you're going to be writing A as 900ths as a decimal, B 6800ths as a decimal, C 1300ths as a decimal, and D 9900ths as a decimal. So in a moment when you're ready, please pause this video, have a go at writing those decimals out, and then you can click onto the next slide for the answers. Best of luck. Okay guys, let's go through all the answers to the question 1 of guided practice. So let's start with A. You were asked to write 900ths as a decimal. So you can see here that we know we've got no ones, we've got no tenths, but we do have 900ths. So we would write 900ths as 0.09. Now, question B, we've got 6800ths. Now we know that if we were going to partition that would give us 6 tens or 60, and then 8 of those hundredths left. So we know as a decimal we'd be able to write that as 0.68 because there's nothing in the ones column, there's 6 in the tenths column, and 8 in the hundredths column. Okay, now question C. If you need to partition with that number, it's absolutely fine. We know that 13 would be partitioned into 10 and 3, and writing 13 hundredths as a decimal, it would be 0 because there's nothing in the ones column, and we've got 1 of the tenths, and then we've got 3 in the hundredths column, so that would give us 0.13 as the answer. And then last but not least, question D, we've got 99 hundredths. So we know that if we partition 99, we would have 90 tens and we would have 9 hundredths. So as a decimal, we would write that therefore as 0.99 because we have got nothing in the ones column, we've got 9 tenths in the tenths column, and we've got 9 hundredths in the hundredths column. So I'm hoping that's pretty straightforward. Some of you might have drawn, like I've done, kind of a little mini place value chart above the numbers to help. Again, you might have used the counters and drawn them out, but I'm sure you would have realized by question B and especially D, it would have taken you an awfully long time to be drawing out all those counters. So I think it'd be an easier use of time to do the partitioning as well as writing little place value numbers, letters above your numbers. Right, I want you to then click along and we're going to do a second part of guided practice. Well done, guys. Okay, moving on to question 2 of guided practice. Again, very similar to the first question. However, we've got a few more discs and numbers to be worrying about. So we're going to be writing each number as a decimal. And remember, you can use a ones, a tenths or a hundreds counter to help you. I know we don't have those counters at home, but like I said, you can actually draw them if you need to and show your regrouping. So we've got A, B, C and D. I'd like for you in a moment to pause this video, have a go at working out how you're going to write each of those numbers as a decimal, and then come back and click onto the next slide for the answers. Best of luck, guys. Okay guys, it's answer time for question 2 of guided practice. So let's start off with question A. We had to therefore write 2 and 5 hundredths as a decimal. So we can see here that actually that 2 is 2 ones. We know that there's 0 in the tenths column, and we know we've got 5 hundredths. So your answer would have been 2.05. Fantastic. Right, moving on to question B. We had to therefore write 2 and 23 hundredths as a decimal. We can see that we've got 2 in the ones column and we've got 20 in the tens column, and then a 3 in the hundreds column. So the answer would be 2.23. Right, question C. 4 and 30 hundredths as a decimal. Now I'm not going to do all of the place value numbers above, but I'm hoping you'll be able to see the pattern here that we would therefore write question C as 4.30. And last but not least, question D, writing 1 and 51 hundredths as a decimal would be 1.51. Now I'm hoping that you found that quite straightforward. We are going to be asking that you go to your workbooks and complete worksheet 6 on pages 11, 12 and 13. Remember, there's 3 of them there. But I do want you to just click to the next slide because I want to explain how I want you to answer the questions in your workbook. Okay guys, so once you've listened to this lesson online, you're going to go back to your workbooks, like I said, and you're going to start on page 11 and begin worksheet 6. Now, of course, like always, please make sure you're writing the date up on the date part of the sheet. But when you get to actually filling in the blanks, please can you make sure that you are showing your regrouping. So you can see here on question 1, you have got 12 hundredths and you're going to regroup that into 1/10 and 2 hundredths. And I've kind of drawn this red regrouping ring to show that you have regrouped 10 of those counters. You're also going to have to fill out the place value chart, and you're also going to have to fill out the final decimal at the bottom. So there's 3 things for you to fill out on some of the questions. So please make sure you're doing that on all of them. And like always, please show all of your workings out, whether that's partitioning, regrouping, drawing place value charts or counters. I'd love to see it. Anyway, guys, best of luck, and I can't wait to see how this lesson goes for you at home. Bye for now.